There is a power in silence that many fail to recognize. Silence is not weakness, it is wisdom in action. When you refuse to engage in unnecessary conflict, when you do not fight every battle with words, you allow truth to reveal itself. It is not always your responsibility to expose deception, manipulation, or wrongdoing. Sometimes all you need to do is remain silent and let guilt speak for itself. People who operate in deceit expect a reaction from you. They expect you to argue, to defend yourself, to prove your innocence. But silence frustrates them because it removes their ability to manipulate the narrative. When you do not respond to false accusations, when you do not chase after those who have misunderstood you, you force their own actions to be examined, and guilt, when left alone, will always rise to the surface. Consider this. When someone knows they are innocent, they do not feel the need to over-explain. But when someone carries guilt, they attempt to justify, to shift blame, to create distractions. Your silence does not mean you are unaware. It means you are wise enough to know that truth does not need to be defended. The truth will stand on its own. Many people will wrong you in life. Some will betray your trust. Some will slander your name. And some will try to bring you down simply because they cannot handle the light within you. But when you choose silence instead of retaliation, you give them no fuel to continue their deception. The more they talk, the more they expose themselves. There are those who will walk away from you thinking you will chase after them. But when you remain still, when you do not run to clear the air, they are forced to sit with their own actions. Their conscience will not let them rest. Their guilt will whisper to them in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Silence is a test. It reveals who is truly convicted and who is just pretending. It separates those who have a sincere heart from those who only seek to manipulate. When you are falsely accused, remain silent and watch. Those who carry truth will eventually be vindicated, and those who carry guilt will eventually be exposed. Never let the world pressure you into defending yourself against lies. Stand in the integrity of your character and let time be the judge. The truth is like a seed. It does not need to be explained. It only needs time to grow. Those who are guilty will reveal themselves without you ever saying a word. Your silence is not a loss. It is a strategy. It is wisdom. It is power. Silence is wisdom in action. It is the ability to discern when to speak and when to withhold words. Many believe that power is in the loudest voice, in the ability to argue, to defend, to counter every accusation. But true strength is found in restraint. When you remain silent in the face of deception, manipulation, or falsehood, you demonstrate a level of control that few possess. It takes wisdom to understand that not every battle is worth fighting with words. Some conflicts are meant to be observed, not engaged in. There are those who will twist your words, misinterpret your intentions, and try to pull you into unnecessary disputes. When you engage with them, you give them the opportunity to drag you into their web of confusion. But when you remain silent, you strip them of that power. You show that you are not easily provoked, that your peace is not dictated by their actions. Silence is not ignorance, it is strategy. It is knowing that words once spoken cannot be taken back. It is choosing not to lower yourself to the level of those who seek to bait you into unnecessary arguments. When you are quiet, you are observing, you are analyzing, you are allowing time to work on your behalf. People who operate in deception often expose themselves when they no longer have someone to argue with. They become restless, uneasy, desperate to justify their position. In their efforts to prove themselves right, they reveal their own guilt. There is wisdom in knowing when silence speaks louder than words. Not everything requires your response. Not every accusation needs your defense. Sometimes silence says everything that needs to be said. It is in the stillness that truth begins to rise, that clarity begins to settle, and that those who are guilty begin to unravel under the weight of their own deception. Guilt reveals itself over time. There is no need to chase after those who have wronged you. No need to argue with those who twist the truth, and no need to fight battles that time itself will settle. When someone carries guilt, it is not something that can be hidden forever. No matter how well they mask their actions with confidence, no matter how much they try to justify themselves, it lingers in the mind, it disturbs the heart, and it weighs heavily on the soul. A guilty person often speaks more than necessary. They feel an unshakable need to explain, to shift blame, to convince others that they are not at fault. But the more they speak, the more their own words contradict them. They build stories, they manipulate details, they create illusions. Yet in doing so, they reveal the very truth they seek to conceal. The one who remains silent, on the other hand, gives no fuel to the fire. Without a response to battle against, the guilty are left alone with their own conscience. And that is a burden they cannot escape. Truth does not need to fight for recognition. It does not need constant repetition to remain valid. It stands firm, unshaken, waiting for its moment to emerge. Lies, however, require maintenance. They need effort, reinforcement, and constant justification to keep them alive. A guilty person must continuously alter their story, adjust their version of events, and seek out new ways to maintain control. But over time, inconsistencies appear. The weight of deception becomes too heavy to carry. Silence forces guilt into the open. It removes distractions, clears the noise, and allows time to expose what needs to be seen. It is not your responsibility to prove who is right and who is wrong. Your silence is not a sign of defeat. It is the patience that allows guilt to do its work. And when the time comes, what has been hidden will be revealed, not because you fought to expose it, but because guilt cannot remain buried forever. Silence frustrates manipulators. Those who operate in deception thrive on control. They seek to pull you into their web of manipulation, to provoke a reaction, to dictate how you respond. Their greatest weapon is not just their words, but the emotions they stir within you. They know that if they can get you to react, they can shift the focus away from their own guilt and place the attention on your response. But when you refuse to engage, when you choose silence over unnecessary conflict, you disrupt their entire strategy. Manipulators want you to defend yourself because it gives them more material to twist and distort. They want you to argue so they can turn the narrative in their favor. They want you to fight back so they can play the victim. But silence strips them of this power. It leaves them talking to themselves, scrambling for a way to maintain control. When you do not respond to their accusations, when you do not chase after them for clarity, when you do not engage in their tactics, they are left to deal with the weight of their own action. A manipulator cannot stand silence because it forces them to sit with the reality they have tried to escape. It denies them the reaction they were counting on. They expect you to fight, to explain, to beg for understanding. But when you remain still, their frustration grows. They start revealing their own intentions without realizing it. They begin to push harder, talk louder, and make even greater mistakes in their desperation to regain control. Silence is not just a lack of words, it is an active disruption of manipulation. It exposes who truly has power in the situation. The person who is calm, composed, and unshaken is the one in control. The person who is desperate for a reaction, who continues to press for a response, is the one who is losing control. When you refuse to play the game, when you deny them the reaction they seek, you force them to face themselves. And nothing is more uncomfortable for a manipulator than being left alone with their own truth. Truth does not need defense. It stands firm, unmoved by accusations, unshaken by lies, untouched by manipulation. When you know the truth, when you walk in integrity, there is no need to constantly explain yourself or prove your innocence. Truth speaks for itself. It may not always be recognized immediately, but it does not change to fit opinions, nor does it require constant justification to remain valid. It simply is. Those who operate in deception feel an urgency to defend themselves because lies need maintenance. Falsehood demands effort, requires reinforcement, and must be continuously adjusted to remain believable. But truth remains steady. It does not waver under pressure. It does not need to shout to be heard. It does not need approval to exist. This is why the one who is right can remain silent while the guilty feel the need to keep talking. The more a lie is spoken, the more it exposes itself, while the truth, even in silence, remains evident to those with discernment. Reason to twist your words. An opportunity to create more confusion. But when you remain silent, when you refuse to fight battles that do not require your sword, you force the truth to reveal itself over time. People who are grounded in truth do not live in anxiety over being misunderstood. They do not chase after every rumor, nor do they feel the need to explain themselves to those who are determined to believe otherwise. Truth always rises. It may take time, but it will come forth in its own strength. And when it does, those who stood on lies will crumble under the weight of their own deception. The truth does not need to be defended. It only needs to be lived. The guilty over-explain. Those who have done wrong often feel an uncontrollable need to justify themselves. They cannot sit in silence because silence forces them to confront the reality of their actions. Instead, they speak excessively, trying to construct a version of events that removes their accountability. But in their attempt to prove their innocence, they reveal the very guilt they are trying to hide. A person who is innocent does not feel the need to convince others. They are at peace because they know the truth will stand on its own. But a guilty person, knowing that the truth is against them, works tirelessly to create an illusion. They rehearse their words, they craft stories, they make excuses, and they repeat themselves over and over, hoping that their excessive explanations will mask their wrongdoing. But the more they speak, the more inconsistencies appear. Their details begin to shift, their tone becomes defensive, and their desperation grows evident. When someone is truly innocent, their confidence is in their actions, not in how well they can explain themselves. They do not feel compelled to argue, nor do they waste energy trying to change the minds of those who refuse to see the truth. But guilt is restless. It demands attention. It seeks validation. It craves reassurance. This is why the guilty cannot stop talking. They are not speaking to prove anything to others. They are speaking to convince themselves. They hope that if they say it enough times, they might start believing their own deception. Silence, however, is powerful. When you refuse to engage, when you do not entertain unnecessary explanations, you allow guilt to do its own work. A guilty person left alone with their thoughts will begin to unravel. Their conscience will torment them. Their words will betray them, and their own actions will expose them. They may talk louder, but their volume does not equal truth. The more they try to explain, the more they confirm what they are trying to deny. And in the end, their own words will be the evidence against them. Silence forces self-reflection. When you refuse to respond to false accusations, manipulation, or deceit, you leave the guilty alone with their own conscience. And nothing is more tormenting to a person who has done wrong than being left to wrestle with their own thoughts. They may try to escape accountability by shifting blame, by stirring up confusion, by seeking validation from others, but when there is no argument to fuel their distractions, they are forced to sit in the presence of their own wrongdoing. The weight of guilt does not need an external judge. It is a fire that burns within, a voice that speaks in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. This is why those who know they are wrong desperately seek engagement. They want a fight, they want a reaction, they want anything that will silence the voice of conviction within them. But when they are met with silence, that voice grows louder. It follows them when they are alone, it disrupts their peace, and it reminds them of the truth they are trying to suppress. People often believe that silence is a sign of weakness, but in reality, it is a mirror. It forces a person to look at themselves without distraction. When you do not engage in their chaos, they are left alone with the consequences of their own choices. They can no longer point fingers. They can no longer create confusion, and they can no longer use you as an excuse for their behavior. The only thing left is the truth they have been running from. A guilty person cannot outrun their own mind. They may act as if they feel no remorse, but deep inside, silence has already begun its work. It strips away the noise, it removes the justifications, and it confronts them with the reality they have tried to avoid. And the longer they are left in that silence, the heavier their guilt becomes. They may try to drown it out with distractions, with lies, with validation from others. But silence is relentless. It does not argue, it does not fight, and yet it is the most powerful force in exposing the truth. Silence exposes insecurity. The guilty cannot stand being ignored because their confidence is built on external validation. They rely on the approval, the reactions, and the attention of others to uphold their false narratives. When you refuse to respond, when you do not give them the reaction they seek, you remove their foundation. You force them to sit with the reality that their words and actions are not as powerful as they believe. Insecurity thrives on control. Those who manipulate, deceive, or betray others often do so because they are deeply insecure. They fear being exposed, they fear being questioned, and they fear being powerless. So they create chaos, they seek constant validation, and they talk endlessly to defend themselves. But silence denies them control. It takes away their ability to dictate the conversation. It forces them to deal with their own internal turmoil. When someone is truly secure in themselves, they do not need to chase after explanations or approval. They are not shaken by lies, nor do they crumble under false accusations. They stand firm in the truth, knowing that time will reveal everything. But those who are insecure cannot handle this kind of strength. They need constant reassurance. They need to be believed. They need to be heard. And when they are met with silence, their own insecurities consume them. The more desperate they become for a response, the more obvious their weakness becomes. They may start reaching out in different ways, trying to provoke you, trying to manipulate others into defending them, or trying to create a false narrative to regain control. But the harder they try, the more they reveal the truth about themselves. Silence strips away their illusions. It removes their ability to hide behind words. It forces them to face their deepest fear, that without control over others, they have no power at all. Silence exposes contradictions. A liar must remember every word they have spoken, every false detail they have woven into their deception. They must keep track of their stories, adjust their responses, and control the narrative to keep their illusion intact. But truth requires no maintenance. It remains steady, unshaken, and consistent. When you choose silence, when you refuse to engage in their games, you remove their ability to manipulate the conversation. They are left to carry the weight of their own words, and under that pressure, their inconsistencies begin to surface. A dishonest person thrives on confrontation because it gives them an opportunity to distort reality. They use emotional tactics, they exaggerate details, they twist words to make themselves appear innocent. But when they are met with silence, when there is no argument to manipulate, they must stand on their own words. And this is where they begin to unravel. The more they speak, the more their version of events changes. The gaps in their lies become wider, and those who once believed them begin to notice the discrepancies. People who tell the truth do not struggle to remain consistent because truth does not change. It does not require effort to maintain, nor does it shift based on convenience. But deception is a heavy burden. A liar must continuously build upon their falsehoods, adding layer after layer to keep their story intact. And yet, no matter how carefully they craft their words, the truth always finds a way to wry. A contradiction here, an inconsistency there, a slip of the tongue. Each one exposes what they are trying so hard to conceal. Silence speeds up this process. It forces the guilty to keep talking, and in doing so, they expose themselves. They may try to cover up their mistakes with more lies, but deception is a house built on sand. The more they try to patch the cracks, the more unstable their foundation becomes. And eventually their own words collapse on them. Not because you argued, not because you defended yourself, but because you allowed time and truth to do their work. Silence removes distractions. When you do not respond to accusations, manipulations, or deceit, you strip away the noise that the guilty use to disguise their wrongdoing. A dishonest person thrives on confusion. They rely on drama, conflict, and exaggerated emotions to shift focus away from their actions. They create distractions, hoping to make you react, to pull you into their chaos, so that the real issue is lost in the argument. But when you remain silent, when you refuse to entertain their games, you force the focus back onto them. Without a reaction to feed their distractions, they are left exposed. They can no longer twist your words, they cannot use your emotions against you, and they have no way to shift blame onto you. All that remains is their own behavior, standing in the light of truth. And the longer the silence lasts, the more uncomfortable they become. They scramble for ways to regain control, but with no one to argue against, their tricks lose their power. The world begins to see them for who they truly are, not through the lens of the confusion they try to create. People who operate in truth do not fear clarity. They do not need distractions because their words and actions align. But deception cannot survive without chaos. It needs distractions to survive, just like a fire needs oxygen. When you take away the oxygen, when you refuse to engage, the fire begins to suffocate. The more they try to ignite conflict, the more obvious it becomes that they are trying to hide something. And in that moment, silence becomes louder than any argument. It becomes the undeniable proof of their guilt. The guilty may try to create new distractions, bringing in others to speak for them, trying to shift the narrative to something else. But the truth has already been set in motion. They cannot escape what they have done. Without distractions to hide behind, they must face the consequences of their own choices. And that is the power of silence. It clears away the noise, allowing only the truth to remain. Silence forces accountability. When you refuse to respond to manipulation, deceit, or false accusations, you remove the possibility of debate, leaving the guilty with only one thing to confront: their own actions. Many people avoid responsibility by shifting blame, twisting narratives, or provoking a reaction that makes them appear as the victim. But when there is no response, no argument, and no defense, they are left alone with the truth they have tried so hard to escape. Accountability is a heavy burden for those who refuse to take responsibility. They will do anything to avoid it: lie, manipulate, play the victim, even seek support from others to justify their actions. But silence leaves them no way out. It does not give them an excuse to shift blame. It does not offer them a target to attack. And it does not provide them with an opportunity to twist the situation in their favor. Instead, it places them face to face with the reality of what they have done. Guilt demands an audience. A person who knows they are wrong will always seek validation from others to escape the weight of their conscience. They want to argue, they want to explain, they want to justify. Because if they can convince someone else that they are not guilty, perhaps they can convince themselves as well. But silence denies them this escape. It leaves them with no one to argue against, no one to manipulate, no one to share their burden of guilt. And in that isolation, accountability becomes unavoidable. Those who walk in truth do not fear accountability. They do not run from consequences, nor do they need to manipulate the situation to make themselves look innocent. But the guilty, when left alone with their actions, are forced to wrestle with the truth they have denied. And in time, the weight of that truth becomes unbearable. Not because you fought them, not because you exposed them, but because you allowed them to expose themselves. That is the power of silence. It does not accuse, yet it condemns. It does not argue, yet it convicts. It does not chase justice, yet it ensures that justice is served. Silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the weapon of the discerning, the shield of the innocent, and the mirror that forces the guilty to face themselves. It does not seek revenge, yet it delivers justice. It does not fight battles, yet it wins wars. When you refuse to engage in manipulation, when you choose not to defend yourself against falsehoods, you shift the weight of truth onto those who seek to distort it. And under that weight, they crumble, not by your words, but by their own. The guilty will try to provoke you, to pull you into their chaos, to make you react so they can escape the truth. But do not be deceived. Stand firm. Let silence do its work, for in the absence of your defense, their guilt will echo louder than any argument. Time will expose them, truth will vindicate you, and justice will come not by force, but by the undeniable power of silence.